All right. So we're live on Facebook. We're recording. I'm admitting.
Oh, you're a pro. You're a lot better at this than I am.
Yeah, the two dozen.
I don't know what I'm doing on Zoom.
Yeah. Yeah. I'll give everybody a chance to connect here. And all right. So here we go. Welcome everybody again to another episode of A Frightmare Before Christmas from a Free Thinkers Corner of Books and More in Dover, New Hampshire. Tonight, got Allan Leverone from Londonderry, New Hampshire. He's the author of more than 30 books and numerous short stories. He's a New York Times and USA Today selling on the bestsellers list. He's a Derringer Award winner, and he's a semi-retired air traffic controller. Before we get started, if everybody just keep your mics muted and your videos off, just to kind of keep down the distractions and confusion. If you have any questions, please use the chat box, and I'll relay it to Al, unless he happens to pick up on it, and he can answer it himself.
I
Al,
don't
thanks for
see any
joining us.
text, so I won't be able to answer anything. I don't see any text, so.
Okay. All right. Well, I'll take care of that then. So
Yes.
thank you for joining us, and how you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks very much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. I appreciate it.
Great. Yeah, and we appreciate you being part of it. My daughter was talking about The Nightmare Before Christmas, and that movie there way back just before Thanksgiving, and I was just thinking, another series that I could do for authors, and Krampus came up because there's a dark side to Christmas. So we went with I was thinking about the Krampus thing, and we do have a Krampus book at the store, so I figured put that out. And then I just for some reason thought of The Nightmare Before Christmas. Let's do a Frightmare Before Christmas.
I think it's
And
a cool idea.
Feature a bunch of horror writers. What a great time of the year for doing that, right?
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So you, like I said, you have over 30 books and short stories. And I'll say the first one that I've ever read of yours. Well, let me start by we used to work together. We were both air traffic controllers in Boston. You for 30 years in Boston or so, and I started out in San Diego, and then we ended up together at the same facility.
Correct.
And so once I found out that you were a writer, of course, I started looking into your book because I'm an avid reader, and you're an avid reader too. And let's see. So you started your first books around like 2006, I believe.
Yes. I started out. Well, I've been an avid reader my whole life. I always loved to read, and I always admired people that could create worlds just in their mind and transfer them to the page and transfix readers like I had been transfixed in reading my favorite authors through the years. And it was one of those things where I never really had the confidence to try or the time to try or whatever. I kept putting it off. I always wanted to see if I could write a book. And a couple years before, I'd say probably around 2002 or three, I started writing on a regular basis, but not fiction. I was working on a sports blog at foxsports.com, and it was a lot of fun. And it ended up being pretty successful. One of my stories spent some time on the front page of MSN.com, and it was eye-opening because the thousands and thousands and thousands of people were seeing this story that I worked on, and it was really cool. But at some point along the line, I would say in early 2006, it occurred to me that what I really wanted to be doing was writing fiction. I wanted to see if I could write a book. So around the fall, I would say October of that year, I started working on my first novel, and I really haven't stopped. Well, I kind of stopped recently. I haven't written anything for a couple months now, but basically the last 14 years, I've always been working on something.
I was going to say a couple months is a long time for you to go without writing a.
It's the longest I've ever gone since I started. I mean, I was just I would finish one book and immediately start another. I just, like I said, I started because I wanted to see if I could do it, and I found out that I could. I didn't know if it was readable. I didn't know if anyone would want to, read it or not. But I finished a book, and I was like, well, okay, I wrote this book. What do I do now? Like I had visions of contacting a couple major publishers and maybe them having a bidding war over my my manuscript and making a lot of money and becoming the next Stephen King and selling millions of copies. Well, it didn't work that way, but um, I finished this first novel in probably early March or April of 2007, and I had no idea what to do with it. So I started. At that time, there were no ebooks. There was no self-publishing. Basically, the only route to take to selling books, the only realistic route was to try and get a literary agent. So I threw my energy into researching agents that represented the kind of thing I was writing at the time, which was Pascagonkey was my first book I ever wrote, although it wasn't my first book published. So I started researching agents. I probably amassed well over 100 rejections from literary agents, and it took me years before my first book got published. But in the meantime, I was still writing. So I had probably written 4 books before the first one ever saw the light of day. But that's probably more than you ever wanted to know about how I got started writing. But that's
No,
the story.
no, that's exactly what we'd like to know. So my first experience with your books was an ebook.
Mhm.
Um, my wife had gotten her, or I had gotten her first Nook, um, and that's when I had met you when we started working together and found
Right.
out that you were a writer. And so I said, "Oh, okay. Well, how about this story here?" And it happened to be only on ebook format. It
Mhm.
was The Becoming,
Yeah, 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 yeah.
and I was hooked. That was such
Right.
a great story. And to give everybody a little idea of what it is, I have the overview right here. So it's nearly a century ago, the Tonopah mine in Tonopah, Pennsylvania, was shut down, sealed off by government, and abandoned after a series of unexplained disappearances deep beneath the Earth's surface. But whispered rumors of something unnatural roaming the long abandoned tunnels continued decades after its forced closure. When 12-year-old Tim McKenna decides to explore the site of the tragedy, he reawakens an ancient evil, one that has been trapped in darkness, waiting, and now it's free.
I'll tell you.
It, it was a great book. I mean, I just, two things happened. One, realized that I don't like Nooks. I got to stick with regular hard copy books. And two, that was just, you're a fantastic writer, because that book just sold me. And it
Well,
was,
thank you. I appreciate that. Well, it's a funny thing about that particular novella. Everything I've written, literature is subjective. So some you might love something I wrote, other people might hate it, and nobody's right and nobody's wrong. But that particular story, I don't think I've ever heard a negative comment about it, and that's pretty unusual because anybody can go on Amazon and throw a review up slamming the author. It's really easy to do, and I've gotten my more than my share of them. But I don't think I've ever heard a negative comment about that story, and it's kind of interesting. When I was I did some research and I read a story about a mining town in Pennsylvania where they had to shut down the whole town and move everybody out because of I think it was coal fires. The mines caught fire, and the mine they're still burning to this day. If you walk
oh,
through
yeah, yeah,
the
yeah,
town,
yeah.
you've probably seen it, right?
Yep.
And I read that, and I was fascinated by that, and that's what kind of the whole story of the becoming grew from that. I read that story, and I was like, I got to write something about this because this is awesome. I mean, it wasn't awesome for the people living there. It kind of
Right.
sucked for them, but what an interesting story. And so the final version of the becoming doesn't have anything to do with mines catching fire. That's just kind of what got me thinking about mines and all that. So that there's really no relationship to the actual town there, but that's how that story got started. And like I said, it you're one of not very many people that have probably read that, but of people who have, I've never gotten a negative comment about it. So that's kind of gratifying.
Well, so, some of the reviews are, it'll keep you up and on the edge of your chair long into the night, which it did. I could not put that thing down. A sure-footed, masterful thriller with a breakneck pace that never lets up. I love this book. Suspenseful, well written. Al Leverone raises the stakes with every turn of the page. So I mean, and it goes on and on. They're all like that. So yeah, it was absolutely fantastic. And so from that point, I looked into your. Well, we can start with here. Let's talk about your. It was the first one you published, was the or wrote, was the Paskin Yankee series. I have such a hard time saying that.
Everybody does. Nobody really knows how to say it. And you know what? It's a made up town. It's a made up name, so you can say it any way you want. I can't tell
Okay.
you you're wrong.
Yeah. So tell us about that series. How because Becoming is a supernatural,
Oh yeah.
still thriller, mystery,
Mhm.
but more so on the supernatural side. This one, it's considered horror and dark thriller.
Mhm. I wanted to, well, first of all, I wanted to develop a series where, I don't know if you've ever seen the show Supernatural, but
My
I,
wife's
I
favorite.
wanted, I love that show. And I kind of wanted to develop a series of books, not really based on supernatural, but with the same feel, same aura, the same kind of feel that you get from watching Supernatural. And so I came up with this little tiny town, stone's throw south of the Canadian border, remote, off by itself. Nobody goes through this town. You don't drive through Pascagoula to get anywhere because there is nowhere you can go. It's off by itself, and the town has a very violent, negative history. And coming from that history, supernatural events tend to occur in this town. And so the cast of characters they're recurring characters throughout the 4-book series. I have every intention of writing a 5th, but I haven't gotten around to it yet. So you have Chief Mike McMahon, and the whole group of characters that appear throughout the 4-book series. But the first book is Pascagoula, and it is about a clash between Native Americans and missionaries that took place hundreds of years ago. I believe it's in the late 1600s. It was a long time ago that I wrote the book, so don't quote me on that. But I believe this clash occurred in the late 1600s, and out of that clash, which was very violent, bloody, a lot of people died. One of the final remaining Native Americans cursed the ground that the violence took place on. And as a result of this curse, the majority of the book takes place in modern day, and that causes supernatural events to occur in this little town. I don't want to say too much in case anybody's interested in reading it, but out of that grew the 4-book series. The first one is Pascagoula. The second book that takes place in this little town is called Revenant, which I believe, in fact, I know you carried in your
Yep,
store.
we do have that one.
The third book is called Wellspring, and the fourth book is called Grimoire. And they're all one-word titles. They're all supernatural events that occur in this town. They all can be read as standalones. If you don't, you can read the third one without having read the first two. And I like to think they all work as standalone novels. But if you're into series, then to me, the way to do it, I always like, if I find a series I like, I try to start with book 1 and move all the way through book 300 or however many series, there are in the series. That's the way I like to do it as a reader. So that's what I tried to do as a writer, is develop this series where if you start at Pascagoula, you're going to want to continue. But there are no cliffhangers. I don't like doing that to people. Each book is a story told, beginning, middle, end, the whole story arc. As I said, the characters recur throughout the series, but I don't believe in leaving cliffhangers to make someone buy the next book. I don't like doing that. So
I believe the first one I did read was Revenant. Now, it's been a long time since I read it, but um, that's where some businessman moves up to Pascagoula and buys this cabin out in the middle of nowhere, and there's that's where things kind of snowball from there, right?
Yeah, exactly. The
Yeah, okay.
beginning of the book takes place on the Navajo reservation, where a sacred artifact is stolen in a bloody attack, and this artifact leads to the problems that occur in Pascagonkey, because it's an artifact that allows the possessor to reanimate the recently dead. And so the guy that steals it obviously is not a nice guy. He has nefarious plans for this artifact, and he comes to Pascagonkey and he uses it to kill and reanimate um, one of the less upstanding members of the community and force him to do his bidding. Uh, the story is, I'm not describing it very well probably, but it involves using the reanimated dead guy to steal a software product developed by the rich guy that you're talking about that bought the cabin. And that's the whole everything that occurs in Revenant.
Yep.
It's up to the chief of police and his girlfriend to solve the mystery and make sure the dead guy stays dead. that's
It's,
book two.
it has a little bit of everything in it. It's got the mystery, but it's got the supernatural. It's got the thriller. It's got the horror. It's got the blood and gore and all that. It's just a well-rounded book. Um, you have other series. You've got the Tracy Tanner series, which we have the, again, don't know if I'm pronouncing it correctly, but Bashkir Extraction.
Yep, that's right.
That's the one. We have that one in the store as well. Tell us about that series.
I wanted to develop a series that kind of paid homage to the espionage novels that I've enjoyed reading. I write what I like to read, and that is not just horror, but horror and thrillers and crime novels and noir. So when I'm writing a book, I spend so much time on it. The first draft takes maybe 10, 12 weeks, but it's not anything I would ever want to show anybody because it's a first draft. Like, I just puke the stuff onto the page, and then after I finish, now comes the real work because I have to fix everything that I puked. And so it takes time, and it's trying to get a novel ready for publication is uh, all encompassing. And so by the time I finish one, I'm so sick and tired of it that I want to do something different. That's why I write in multiple genres. If I finish a horror novel, then next thing I'll do is I'll start a Tracy Tanner novel, because it's something completely different. There's no supernatural stuff in the Tanner novels. She's a black ops specialist for the CIA, and the novels take place in the late 1980s, towards the end of the Cold War. And she is, I kind of based her on James Bond without the ridiculousness. And I don't know if you ever remember this, or you remember the series from probably 20 years ago called Alias. Jennifer Garner was in it, and I kind of based some of it on that series because I loved it so much. It was so much fun to watch. But that's what I wanted. I wanted a series with a petite, pretty young woman who is also this sort of super spy, and she can do amazing things, but she's not James Bond. She's not infallible. She's stubborn, and she's impetuous, and sometimes she makes the wrong decisions, but for the right reasons. And so I just had this idea in my mind of this character that I wanted to create, and so I did. I started the first novel in the Tracy Tanner series is called Parallax View. Um, yeah, I like to think each of the novels, it's all fiction, obviously, but they're kind of based on situations that either did occur or could occur in the Cold War. And it's a lot of fun because, we're kind of contemporaries. I'm a little older than you, but we grew up, I grew up in the 70s and 80s, and I like featuring this 1980s series that has cars that I remember. Like, I once right after I got married, I had an old Ford Granada. I don't know if you remember the Ford Granada, but I had one for a while. It was kind of like an LTD, only scaled down. And so nobody, like, that car is long gone. Nobody ever has a Ford, like, they're gone. So in one of my books, I have him driving a Ford Granada. It's just a lot of fun. But I try to make Tracy Tanner believable in the sense that um, she's not perfect. But that's probably quite honestly, my favorite series. I wanted to create a series that I could self-publish. Um, Only one of those novels are through a publisher. The rest are all self-published. It's mine. I own it. I can do whatever I want with it. When Hollywood comes knocking for the movie, I can sell the rights without having to worry about it. It hasn't happened yet, but you never know. Maybe tomorrow. And so that's what got me going on Tracy. I wanted to have someone fallible, but trying to do the right thing for the right reasons, even if she doesn't always succeed. That's my theory behind Tracy.
Well, it must be your favorite because you've got 8 of them,
Yep.
right? 8 in the series right now.
Hopefully there'll be a 9th next year.
Yep.
I haven't started working on it yet, but I have no intention of ever stopping writing Tracy novels. She's my favorite character.
Nice. Well, we got over on Facebook Live there, we got Tony Tremblay. We have a couple of his books in the store as well, and we had him on our Frightmare series. He says, "Hey, Alan, good to see you again." And he says he really enjoyed Mr. Midnight. Has there been a follow-up? Now, of course, Mr. Midnight was the best book of 2013 according to Suspense Magazine.
Mm-hmm. I was really surprised when they gave me that honor, and thrilled, obviously. First of all, hi Tony. Thanks for joining us. It's really nice of you. Tony Tremblay, as you know, is one of the nicest guys in writing. He's a terrific author. I met him years ago at Anthocon. I think I was there in support of Mr. Midnight. Right after that novel came out was when they had Anthocon in Portsmouth. So I was there for Dark Fuse, and he was there too, and just the nicest guy you ever want to meet. Like, if there's a nicest guy in writing, Tony Tremblay is that guy, and he's a terrific author too, just an incredible writer. But anyway, Mr. Midnight is probably the bloodiest, most brutal, violent novel I will ever write. It features the worst bad guy you could imagine, and his name is Milo Caine. He is a serial killer. He haunts the streets of Boston, abducting and doing really nasty things to people that he feels won't be noticed if they're missing. Addicts, prostitutes, the underbelly of society that he feels won't be missed, or if they are missed, won't be searched for very hard. And when I wrote Mr. Midnight, I wanted to, most of my novels, whether they're horror novels, thrillers, crime novels, whatever, they're not all that particularly bloody. Like, I don't write Texas Chainsaw Massacre type books where a guy just goes in and starts cutting people to shreds. For the most part, my suspense and my horror is psychological. I want to slowly build the terror, and I want you to start feeling like somebody might be sneaking up behind you. But I don't typically write books with a lot of blood and guts. There's always some, but for when I sat down to write Mr. Midnight, I wanted to see if I could. I wanted to try something a little different. So that's what I did. And some of the scenes in Mr. Midnight, I don't want to say they're I mean, I think they're important. They go towards demonstrating what a bad guy Milo Caine is, but they're pretty violent and pretty bloody. And I can't imagine ever writing a more violent book or a more violent bad guy than Milo Caine. But then after I wrote it, I submitted it to Dark Fuse, and that was a terrific company. They published 3 of my novels. A fourth one was in, actually the Lupin Project was in the process of the publication process when Dark Fuse went bankrupt. And that was very unfortunate because Shane Staley of Dark Fuse was a real proponent of horror, a real fan. But anyway, so when I submitted to them, excuse me, submitted Mr. Midnight to Dark Fuse, and they loved it. They published it, and my intention was for it to be a standalone. It was going to be a one-off. That was going to be Mr. Midnight, and he was going to get killed at the end. He was going to get his comeuppance, and that would be the end of it. But while the novel was in editing, incidentally, Mr. Midnight was edited by Greg Giffune, who is a terrific author in his own right, and I discovered a very good editor. One of his major suggestions was that I change the ending just a little bit, and I did. I rewrote the ending, taking his suggestion into account, and I feel like it took a good book and made it great. It really made a difference, and I owe a lot to Greg Giffune's editing because that was his idea, and he just did a terrific job editing this book. But anyway, the new ending allowed me to do a sequel. There was a follow-up to Mr. Midnight, and the real reason I wrote it was because Mr. Midnight was so well received, not necessarily in terms of sales, but critically. To find out that Suspense Magazine had named it one of their best books of 2013, I was floored. Like, I had no idea Suspense Magazine even knew who the hell I was. And so for them to name that, give that book that honor, I still have a hard time believing it. And I'm really humbled and honored by that. But anyway, the follow-up to Mr. Midnight was written largely because of that. I was like, well, so let's see if we can duplicate it. So I wrote a second Milo Caine novel called After Midnight, which was received kind of the opposite of Mr. Midnight. I'm not sure anyone's ever read After Midnight besides me and my immediate family. But I still think it's a pretty good book. It's not, features Milo Caine, the same bad guy from Mr. Midnight. But it's not quite as bloody and violent as the first book. But yeah, there was a second book out. It is available. If anybody wants to read it, you'll be one of a handful of people that have ever read it, probably. But every once in a while, I get asked if I'm going to do a third Milo Caine novel, and I guess I would consider it, but I'm not really sure where I could go with that character. So I don't know if that'll ever happen. I don't want to ever say never, but there's probably only going to be two Milo Caine books, Mr. Midnight and After Midnight, and then he'll probably fade away like he so richly deserves.
Well, that kind of answers part of my next question, is because I thought it was part of the Milo Caine series. Another book of yours that I read and we have in the store is The Lonely Mile.
Mhm.
And so maybe I'm getting them confused, but so I thought that was part of the Milo Caine, where very disturbing. Um, so it's a struggling hardware store owner. He witnesses a kidnapping. He reacts, breaking up the crime and saving a young girl, but the kidnapper, a sociopath known as the I-90 Killer, escapes and vows revenge.
Mhm.
The book that I remember reading, though, was about a prostitute, and it was a psychological thriller, really, just cutting
Mhm.
up little bits and pieces every so often, and it's a mystery. They're trying to save the girl. Is that Mr.
That
Midnight, or?
that is definitely not The Lonely Mile. It may be
Yeah,
Mr.
I didn't.
Midnight. Mr. Midnight. There is a kind of a supernatural component to it because Mr. Midnight Milo Caine has a twin sister that he doesn't know about. They're separated at birth for reasons that become revealed during the book. And his twin sister, who lives in Tampa, she has always wanted to find her birth mother. She was adopted after she was separated from her twin brother that she never knew about. And throughout her life, she wanted to find her birth mother and learn about her history. So eventually she does, and she comes to Boston to meet with her birth mother, and the proximity of her and her brother has supernatural ramifications that cause major problems in the novel. So if you don't remember any of that, then it wasn't Mr. Midnight you read. Mr.
No.
Midnight preys on prostitutes and addicts and the underbelly of society, but the majority of the book is the kind of cat and mouse game, the battle of wits between him and his sister. As far as The Lonely Mile is concerned, I don't remember I don't believe there's a prostitute in it. The part you read about the hardware store owner breaking up the crime and thereby setting himself in the sights of the I-90 killer, the majority of the book is his search for his daughter, who ends up being kidnapped by the I-90 killer. And so it's kind of it's a private detective novel, only he's not a private detective, he's an amateur.
Okay.
He needs to find his daughter before something bad happens to
Yep. Okay. So that is the one. So I don't know why I got prostitute in my head. Maybe just the different ones bits and pieces that I've been reading. But that is the one. There was definitely somebody kidnapped. And it seems it was kind of a psychological thriller.
Yeah, that's what I was trying to do. So thank you for
that. So yeah, I mean, you definitely jump around in genres. You kind of stay within the same realm, but so you have the Tracy Tanner, the thrillers. You've got the Milo Caine, the dark noir, other ones, the Jack Sheridan pulp thrillers.
Yep.
Those are considered a noir, a crime.
Like I said earlier, I try to write what I like to read, and I don't always like to read the same genre. Everything I write probably, well, I would say undoubtedly resembles everything else in a certain way. Like every writer has their style and their voice, and I don't know that I could necessarily change it to write horror as opposed to how I write noir, but there are differences, and I like to change it up. I try to keep things fresh. If I wrote, horror novel after horror novel, I just think I'd get sick of it. Or thriller after, you know what I'm saying? I don't know. No, like I said before, by the time I finish with a book, I'm so sick and tired of that book that I want to do something completely different. So I just try something in a different genre. And a lot of times, I just try things to see if I can do it, to see if they'll work. That was that way with Mr. Midnight, and trying to write a novel that was a little bloodier than I typically wrote. Same thing with the Jack Sheridan pulp thrillers. Those were kind of written in homage to the pulp thrillers of the 1940s, 50s, and 60s. They're shorter, they're punchier, they're filled with action, and they're a lot of fun. Like if you like to read that sort of thing, I like to think you would enjoy it. Of course,
Yeah.
I'm a little biased. What do I know?
Well, so I was going to ask you, what's the difference between the Tracy Tanner thriller and the Jack Sheridan pulp thriller noir styles?
The Tanner books typically, not always, but typically they take place overseas, and they're a little bit longer, and they're more. I kind of base them on, like I said, the espionage novels that I've enjoyed reading. And so I like to think they're a little bit more, I don't know what the word would be. The Sheridan books are more upfront, in your face. This is what's happening. This is what, the bad guy's doing. And this is what Jack Sheridan has to do to make whatever has to happen. The Tracy Tanner books are a little bit more roundabout. She's a little bit more, maybe doing a little bit more detective work, or she has to follow the trail more, maybe a little bit more than Jack Sheridan does. I'm not describing it very well, and that's why I suck at this kind of thing. But they're just, I like to think they're a little bit different. I know that, for instance, if I'm writing a horror novel, I try to be, I want the book to be more atmospheric. I want you to feel the darkness. Um, in a thriller, it's more action. I want something to be happening all the time. I'm going to throw as many obstacles in Tracy Tanner's way as I possibly can and see if she can get around them, over them, or through them. And if she does, I'm going to throw some more in her way. Um, Whereas with a horror novel, like I said, I want you to feel, if I'm doing it right, I want the hairs on the back of your neck to stand up. I want you to feel like you're nervous that somebody's sneaking up behind you. You know what I'm saying? It's kind of hard to describe, but I do feel like I try to write different genres a little bit differently, although it's still the same writer. So I don't
Right.
know.
Well, before I move on to my next question, um, you finally, this a little on a personal note, you finally got, after 50 some odd years, you're only a handful of years older than I am. I've got tattoos, both arms, on my neck. Um, you finally got your first, because I see it every once in a while when you bring your hand up. You finally got your first tattoo.
I love this thing. Can you see it? Hold on, let me show you. See if you can see this. It's my own design. I got it done in Derry, New Hampshire this past February. And I don't know if you can see it, but what
Yeah,
it
you can see
is,
the skull and the hand is death and
yeah, it's the Grim Reaper.
Grim Reaper.
And in the Grim Reaper's hand, he is holding a one of those things at the sand, an hourglass.
Yeah,
And what it is meant to represent is time's passing. You know, the Grim Reaper is waiting for all of us, and he's going to get us. There's no escaping. And so him holding the hourglass is my reminder to myself to not take anything for granted, because I don't have that much time left. None of us do. And so I went last. My wife asked me what I wanted for my 60th birthday, and I told her I wanted a tattoo, and I thought she would think I was crazy, and she probably did. But she was like, "Okay, yeah, go for it." So the end of August of 2019, I did a lot of research. I picked out the tattoo artist that I wanted to do this tattoo. And I went to see him and I told him what I wanted. And he said, well, yeah, I'll do it for you. He said, but I'm really booked up. I can't do it until February. And I was kind of disappointed, but this was the guy I wanted. He said he could do it. I believed him because of the stuff that he had done that I had seen. And I said, okay, so I'll wait. And this past February, just before the pandemic got really bad, I went in. It was supposed to be a two session tattoo. I got there about 2 o'clock. He started working at 2:30, and about 4:35, he goes, this is going really good. He says, want to finish tonight? And I was like, okay, sure. So after about 8 hours, I was kind of regretting that I said I would do it in one sitting because I was beat. And
yep.
but anyway, I'm glad I did, because the second session was supposed to be 3 weeks later, and by then everything was shut down. So I would have been going, a whole year almost with half a tattoo. So thanks for noticing. I'm so
Yeah,
proud of this. I love this thing. It came out
it
so
is
good.
so cool. It is. It is. And
Couldn't be happier.
yeah, my longest one that did pretty much my whole arm, forearm all the way up to my shoulder. It was 6 hours. That's my longest, but
It's a long
um,
time to sit, man.
it is.
The
It
first
is.
couple hours, I was doing really good. I was like, this isn't so bad,
Yeah.
And by the time 10 o'clock rolled around, I was like, I really want to get the hell out of here. But I'm so glad I did it.
Yeah.
I'm still trying to decide what I want to do for my next one, but obviously it's not going to be
See, once you get one, you got to get more.
Mhm. That's what everybody told me, and it
Yep,
really
and it's true. Yep, yep. So all right, let's go back to Tracy Tanner real quick. So you mentioned it's kind of during Cold War times that you wrote these books. How much research did you have to do about? I mean, obviously we lived through the Cold War era for
Mhm.
for the 70s and 80s part of it, anyways. And so, how much research did you have to do to accurately portray that time in your books?
I've done there are writers that will tell you they love research. Oh my God, I go down the rabbit hole of research, and days later I'm not like that. I want to do enough research to lend authenticity to my novel and no more. I don't enjoy research. To me, it's like being back in school. But that said, I probably do more research on the Tracy books than on any of my other books, because I want them I want them to at least feel believable. And if you're going to base a series of novels on an actual event, the Cold War, then you really kind of have to get the details as right as you can within reason. So, for example, when I wrote, hang on a second, which book is it? I guess I don't have it over there, but one of the Tracy books I wrote involves, excuse me, biological weapons. And so I had to do enough research to make this weapon this fictional weapon that I was going to base my novel around believable. And I like to think I did that because I based it on an actual weapon. So hopefully I managed to do that. What I want is for my books to be believable to the average reader. If you are an expert in the Cold War and Cold War weaponry, then you may not, you'll probably see through it. Like, it's probably like, a cop watching cop shows on TV and going, that's ridiculous. That would never happen. If you're an expert on the Cold War, you may look at my books and go, that would never happen. But I like to think that the average person who whether you lived through the Cold War or not, you can read a Tracy book, and I've done enough research that this fictional scenario will be believable. And to greater or lesser extents, I've had to do that with each of the books. The Hitler Deception, the plot of that novel is 90-something-year-old Adolf Hitler is going to come out of retirement and lead a resurgent Nazi party. Well, I had to do a lot of research on Hitler. If the NSA ever goes into my computer hard drive, I'm probably going to be taken away in handcuffs. But all this stuff involves a certain amount of research that I will do reluctantly because I want my novel to be believable. But I'm definitely not going to sit here and try to make you believe that I've done a ton of research on any of my books, because that's not true. What I want is believable scenarios with characters you care about. So I spend a lot of time on character development. My plots, I want to be action-packed in a thriller. I want it to be action-packed. As I said, I want things to be constantly happening, but the most important thing to me is that you care about the characters. Because if you don't care about the characters, if you don't come to want Tracy Tanner to be successful, why would you bother reading? If you don't care about the main character, there's no motivation to follow the plot. There's no motivation to read to the end of the story. So I try more than anything else to develop characters that you're going to care about.
Well, one other book that you needed to, I'm sure, make sure that you had some believability in it because of the people you used to work with for 30 years is Final Vector.
Mm-hmm.
And I know I've read that one too, and I know a few other people who used to be air traffic controllers have read it as well. So for those who don't know, Final Vector is about an air traffic controller whose wife died following a horrific car wreck. The authorities expect foul play. He finds evidence suggesting a Pentagon auditor discovered potentially treasonous material in another computer, and there's has to do with the radar facility at Boston's Logan Airport, and the president, because he's flying in to the airport, armed terrorists storm the facility. So, of course, knowing that the people you worked with while you were writing that one, there definitely has to be some believability in that book.
That was a lot of fun to write because I I got to, well, first of all, I tried to only describe the radar facility using publicly available stuff. So I didn't want to, didn't want to be responsible for any terrorists actually taking over the facility. But it's kind of a funny story about that. As you know, from working there, the facility is surrounded by fencing all the way around, and there's a guard shack at the front that you have to, at least when I was there, you had to show your ID, and they got to know you eventually anyway. They knew everybody that worked there, but you had to show your ID to get let in, and these, armed guards and all that. And in Final Vector, the guards at the gate, they end up getting killed. One of them dies a fairly heroic death, but the other one is not anyone's idea of a hero. And so when I came in one day, like after the book came out, I don't know, a couple months later, whatever, I was coming in, and one of the guys at the guard shack, he made mention of it, and he's like, "You weren't really very nice to us." And I was kind of afraid I was going to get strip searched or something coming to work one day, because these guys weren't too happy about it. So, but yeah, I tried to make it as realistic as I could. Like I said, it was a lot of fun. That's another book that there's a lot of stuff happening in it. I like to, if I'm writing a thriller, I want there to be thrills in it, and so I want there to be action and activity and nefarious things happening. And it was the whole reason I wrote that book. I really had no intention of writing an air traffic control novel or an aviation novel in any way, but I'm stop me if I've told this story before, but when I was searching for an agent, um, I had made a presentation to one. Actually, I was trying to sell, excuse me, I was trying to sell my novel Pascagonkey. I was trying to get him interested in representing me for that novel. And he decided, he's like, "No, it's not really my kind of thing. I can't really, help you with it." And so we're just chatting afterwards, and he goes, what do you do for work? What do you do in the real world when you're not writing?" And I told him, "Well, I'm an air traffic controller." And he's like, "Dude," he's like, like you could have had a V8 guy. He's like, "What are you doing writing horror?" He goes, "You need to write an air traffic control novel." He goes, "To my knowledge," and this is when and literary agent, he goes, "To my knowledge, there's never been one written." He says, the publishers like when you have a platform. They like cop novels to be written by ex-cops. They like, spy novels to be written by ex-CIA. He goes, "Write an air traffic control novel." And at the time I was like, "Oh, okay, thanks. I really appreciate the advice." But inside I was thinking, I do this job every day. It's not that interesting to me. Like, I've been doing it for 30 years. I want to write about things that interest me, not what I do every day at work. But so I got home and I was thinking about it, and I was like, well, I'm sure he's right. If it's going to help me get an agent, or it's going to help me get a publisher, or it's going to help me get a book deal, I'll write an air traffic control novel. So that's what I did. I developed a plot, and I based it at the Boston Tracon where we both worked, and kept my fingers crossed that FAA security didn't come after me. It
Now,
was
for those
fun.
who don't know, a TRACON, it's an acronym for Terminal Radar Approach Control. So it's with the radar facility portion of air traffic. You've got the tower, you've got the airport, you've got the radar approach control, us, well, formerly us,
Yes,
and then there's a larger radar facility called an en route center. So that's how that whole thing works. So, but you did though, and speaking of research though, you did have to do some research, because there was I know you picked a couple people's brains, fellow co-workers, for technical things like guns and some other technical issues that you wanted to make sure you had correct.
yeah. People, especially like with weaponry, people want it to be accurate. And I'm not by any means a gun expert, and so I had a couple people. I won't say who because I don't know if they want me to, but people that I went to, that I worked with, that I would still go to, that I trust, that understand guns and understand. I would tell them what I needed and what I wanted to have happen, and say, is this realistic? Is this something that could happen? And most of the time you go, no, what's wrong with you? Of course you couldn't do that. But, and so we would work through it. And, I like to think it's believable because I had some pretty good help from people with it.
Now, when you had that portion of the manuscript, well, the manuscript done, did you have them read that chapter or those few paragraphs
Yeah.
uh, that
Mhm.
had that to see if you got it correctly? And
Yeah, that's exactly what I did. It was a great resource. And by the time all was said and done, I was pretty confident that it was going to read well. And I like to think it did.
so one of the final, uh, like you said, you like to jump around between different ones. The thrillers, the noir, the pulp, the action adventure, and then you did the Lupin Project, which is completely outside of. It's still a thriller, but now you're talking shapeshifters, werewolves, supernatural stuff, just the full-on board supernatural. What was it like writing something so different compared to what all the other series?
Um, I wanted to write something that, again, this book takes place in kind of a remote area. It's a super secret government facility where they're doing super secret experiments. And what one of the main experiments they're working on is is taking wolves, who are next to sharks probably the ultimate killing machines, the ultimate land predators, at least. They're incredibly majestic animals. I love wolves, but anyway, they're also ruthless killers. I mean, they're very good at what they do. And so this one of the main projects at this super secret facility is they have installed chips, microchips in the wolves' brains, and they're working on controlling the wolves to get the wolves to do what they want them to do. And the scientist in charge of the project is envisioning rescuing hostages, pulling people from burning buildings, all the good that can be done with this project. But of course, it's being run by people with less than pure motives, and they're looking at the military aspects and the other things that can be done that are not necessarily uppermost in the scientist's mind. And so the main thrust of this book is a tragedy that occurs when the project goes wrong, and the search for justice by two young people, a young high school student and a young college student. And that's, I don't want to say too much in case anybody wants to read it, but that's the main thrust of the story. That book also had kind of an interesting path to publication, because that was the one that was in in production at Dark Fuse when the bankruptcy hit there and they went out of business. So I got the rights to the book back, fortunately. Very kindly, Shane gave me my rights back, and I self-published it. But I suck at marketing. I suck at promotion. Like, nobody was reading this book. And I really wasn't happy with having self-published it. So I was looking for another horror publisher that might want to take a chance on this book. And along the way, I met Ken McKinley from Silver Shamrock Publishing, an upstart publisher, an indie publisher, just like Dark Fuse was. And these guys are passionate about horror. They love it, just like Shane did. And I had a couple stories published in two of their anthologies, terrific anthologies with terrific writers, and I'm fortunate to be included. Midnight in the Graveyard was the first one. Midnight in the Pentagram was the second one. Tony has a story in Pentagram. It's a terrific story. But I met Ken through those two anthologies, and in talking to him, I happened to mention that I had these Dark Fuse novels that I got the rights back when they went bankrupt, and I didn't really know what to do with them. I had self-published them, but nobody was reading them. And he goes, "Well, why don't you send me one? Maybe we can publish it." And so I said, "Okay." I sent him the Lupin Project, and he loved it. Um, he's been really supportive, a big proponent of my work, and so it just came out through Silver Shamrock in November, and some of the reviews love it. other reviews. Again, with a lot of my stuff, I don't do necessarily exactly what you're expecting. Silver Shamrock is horror publisher. It's not necessarily straight line horror, so some people haven't really gotten it necessarily. But I'm thrilled that it's there. I think finally this book found a home, so it makes me happy.
Well, you mentioned, people would like it if they read it. You have a portion that you'd like to read?
Yeah. Oh yeah, I do actually. I do. Thank you. This to set this
Suppose you
up.
had worked that in there somehow.
Yeah, nicely done. Just to set this up, this is from towards the beginning of the book. The two young high schoolers have gone to get some privacy, and they've gone deep into the woods. They've driven into the woods. Unbeknownst to them, they're right behind this super secret facility where this experimentation is taking place. And now they're stuck because their car's gotten stuck on a fallen log, and they're surrounded by wolves and they're in big trouble. So here's a little piece of the Lupin Project. The wolves began to creep closer once more, their initial fear of the wrench and the flashlight lessening. Alicia had started to think, against her better judgment, that maybe Eddie would be successful, but now she felt her throat tightening. She slid across the seat to the driver's side and began pounding on the window, hoping to distract the animals or frighten them, or at least startle them, anything to give Eddie a little more time. And it worked, for a moment. The wolves closest to Eddie, 3 or 4 of them, reacted as if being beaten by an invisible switch. They jumped and slinked backward again. Alicia pressed her face to the driver's side window and looked down. Eddie was now almost flat on the ground, his right arm under the car as his left continued swinging the iron lug wrench. It was obvious he was tiring. The wrench swept back and forth across the ground, spraying leaves and dirt, keeping the wolves at bay. Soon it would lose its effectiveness. Even now, the wolves Alicia had startled were beginning to creep forward, their bodies still crouched low to the ground, but their eyes fixed once more on the prize, Eddie Senna. Alicia pounded on the window again and saw to her horror that her actions were having absolutely no effect on the animals this time. They had apparently decided the noise posed no threat. Could wild animals reason that quickly and effectively? Alicia was no zoological expert, but she didn't think so. The thought occurred to her that this whole scenario was off. It was wrong. It was unnatural. Wild animals simply did not act the way these were acting. Everything felt too coordinated, even for pack hunters. It was almost as if they had been somehow trained, guided, controlled. The notions flashed through her mind and then disappeared, because the wolves were again advancing on Eddie. Their muzzles were drawn back now, exposing teeth and signaling merciless intentions. Alicia screamed, "Hurry up, Eddie, hurry up. They're coming, hurry the fuck up." The wolves flinched but kept coming. The one closest to Eddie glanced up and locked eyes with Alicia through the window for half a second, its gaze filled with intelligence and cunning and understanding. Then it returned its attention to the task at hand, and Alicia Havens knew she would relive that split second in her nightmares for the rest of her life, if she survived. "I'm trying, but the log is jammed in the drivetrain. I can't get the leverage to pull it loose." The words floated up from under the car, muffled by steel and glass. His exhaustion and near panic came through loud and clear, though, and for a moment, the lug wrench began swinging with renewed intensity, but only for a moment. Eddie was near the end of his endurance, his strength waning even while being fueled by fear and desperation. Alicia cracked the window and pressed her face to the glass and screamed again, louder this time, directing her voice toward the line of wolves. Get out, go away and leave us alone." Her words had no effect. The wolves kept coming. A blur of motion erupted from Alicia's right, and the car shook on its frame as a fur-clad body leapt and then crashed into the window, and she jerked reflexively backward. For one awful instant, the wolf's face pressed against hers, fangs snapping, saliva drooling, one eye rolling. The creature separated from Alicia by a quarter-inch of automotive safety glass. Then the wolf's momentum carried it past the window and down to the ground. The moment it disappeared from view, she had resumed her position, still yelling, somehow aware the end game had begun. This nightmare was about to reach its conclusion. And it probably goes without saying, but things don't go well for Eddie.
Well, I have to take a moment to apologize to Tony. I didn't realize that I had the chat shut off. So he's been writing a whole bunch of stuff here, and I'm not even seeing it. I'm like, why is nobody asking any questions? But so just, I apologize, Tony. But so real quick, we'll go through this. So first of all, he does say he loved the Lupin Project, and Ken is a good man. Um, and Jesse Billiou, he was on here for a little while, but he had to leave, and he said he read Final Vector, and it kept his head on a swivel all night. Also, badass tattoo.
Thank you. Thank you. I love it.
So Tony asked, when I invited you to come onto the television show that the Taco Society presents, you mentioned that you were uncomfortable doing live interviews. However, you came on and you did great. Now here you are doing another one and you're hitting it out of the park. You seem to be much more comfortable doing these interviews. What's changed?
And nothing. And Tony, if you're still there, I have no idea. Like I am, you would not believe how nervous I'm shaking. I've been shaking this whole time. I suck at this. I'm just like, I'm gonna get when we're done, I'm gonna get up, I'm gonna be drenched in sweat, I'm gonna be exhausted. I'll probably sleep for 12 hours. I've got so much nervous energy. I can't, like, I don't know how you do it. And it's funny that he mentioned the program I joined him on. That was a terrific series. I watched a number of the Taco Society Presents uh, features with different authors, and they're all really well done. And like I said before, Tony's such a nice guy. Like I was, he did it. He ran a great interview. It was a lot of fun, although nerve wracking. And I can't tell you anything's changed. Like this is torture for me. I mean, it's like I don't mind doing it, but I also hate doing it because I'm not comfortable with it. But
Well,
anyway,
I
to answer
appreciate.
your question, nothing's changed.
I appreciate you stepping out of your comfort zone to do this for us.
It's nice of you
Um,
to ask me, so I appreciate it.
so back to the Lupin Project real quick. Now that you've got the werewolf aspect, have you ever thought of taking that one step further and going vampires?
Oh, it's funny. I can't believe you asked me that. Yeah, I absolutely have thought of that. And in fact, when I talked to Ken McKinley about maybe publishing my old Dark Fuse stuff, I told him, you know, he's very supportive. He believes in my work. He really likes my stuff. And so I told him, you know, if you're going to do that for me, I'd like to offer you a you know, something original, a new book, not just reprints. And he said, well, okay. He's like, what do you want to do? And I said, well, I've written a ton of books, but I've never written a vampire novel. So I can't believe this is like the mind meld going on here
Yeah.
because that's exactly my intention for my next horror novel is to be a vampire book. And it's not going to be sparkly teen angsty vampires. It's going to be old school.
Well,
And
see, here's that mind melding again, because others who have been on with us over the past couple weeks, they have dipped into the vampire genre,
mhm,
and each one I said, yeah, I love the vampire things except for the sparkly ones. So I'm
yeah,
right there with you. Out in the sun, sparkling, no thank you.
yeah,
Put them
no,
in the
no,
dark. I don't mind the romance part of it because there is a romance to
yeah, that's
vampires.
okay.
Um, uh, and even a sexual quality to them, but just the darkness, the immortality, and the idea of being immortal and stuff. I could
Yeah,
go interview with a vampire, or I could go Laura Clay Hamilton's Anita Blake series vampire. I
yeah,
could I could go sparkly. No, thank you.
I'm
Um,
100% with you. So it's not going to be anything like that. Don't worry.
have you ever thought of expanding on some of your other short novels or short stories like The Becoming?
Um, Not really. I mean, it was kind of a one-off, but again, I like it was well received by the people that have read it. It's not something that um, has been very widely read, I don't think, but I don't recall ever getting a negative comment about it or a bad review. So maybe like I would never say never. Like it's not. I don't feel like it's on the horizon right now, but you know, my intention for next year is to write a Tracy Tanner novel and a vampire novel, and beyond that, maybe some short stories. I love, you know, writing a novel it takes so long. It's so much work. I love writing short stories as well because you can whip out a short story in a few days or to a couple weeks, depending on the length, or maybe a little bit longer. But um, you know, the immediate gratification aspect is not there with a novel, where it kind of is with a short story. Work hard on it for a while and it's done and it's ready to go. And so I've started a couple stories that I fully intend to finish this year, and then hopefully submit and maybe see in magazines or whatever. But uh, my immediate future, like I said, is probably a couple short stories, another Tracy novel, and the vampire novel. Beyond that, um, you know, who the hell knows? I go back and forth all the like I have no plan for anything. Like who knows? I might get up tomorrow and start writing a crime novel. I don't know, but that's my plan right now. Tomorrow it might change.
So what would you model your, if any, your vampire novel on? Would it be sort of like a traditional Dracula, or more like a necromancer type where they're out in the open, like Laurel K. Hamilton? I don't know if you're familiar with her books.
Yeah.
Um, or we definitely know it's not going to be modeled after Twilight.
No,
Um,
it won't be modeled. Not that there's anything wrong. No, like I'm not dissing Twilight.
no, no, no.
Um,
But
my I kind of have an idea of what I might like to do. Interestingly enough, I read an article not too long ago. My wife forwarded it to me, actually. She found it. It was about a vampire scare that took place in New England back in the 1800s. It was, I want to say, I don't exactly remember, the mid 1800s, maybe 1840s, 1850s. And what happened was these people were getting ill, they were getting sick, and doctors didn't know what was wrong with them. And so people, they filled the void of understanding with superstition. And so there were towns in New England in the 1800s that went through vampire scares, and these people were digging up the bones of their recently departed dead and doing things to the bodies, uh, in specifically removing their hearts and doing things, removing limbs and placing them back in different ways to try to put them to rest, because they felt these people, who were in many cases their relatives, in many cases their close relatives, were vampires that were coming back to prey on them and their children. And this was, again, it was, 150, 60, 70 years ago, whatever, it was a long time ago, but it was, it actually happened. And not just in one or two cases, there were many cases. And so I look at that as a fascinating historical event that nobody seems to really know about. And B, what a cool place to start a vampire novel. Like, the beginning of this novel would definitely occur in the 1800s, and it would be that kind of scenario, only instead of, in at least one case, instead of the bones of the recently departed dead being desecrated uh, for no reason, maybe one of them was a vampire, or a couple of them were vampires. And so that's how I see things starting. And probably, I would have a prologue that took place in the 1840s or 50s. I would have to do some more research, um, and then we would move to present day. And beyond that, I haven't really fleshed it out too much, but it one of the most terrifying books I ever read when I was younger was Salem's Lot. And if I had to model a vampire novel on anything, I can't imagine a better starting off point than Salem's Lot. Stephen King is a master. He Reading his books as a kid were eye openers to me. I went from, the Hardy Boys to Carrie, and I was like, well, this is awesome. And so, Stephen King's, particularly his early work,
yeah.
has some amazing books in there. And Carrie, I didn't really love Carrie that much, but some of his other stuff, Salem's Lot and The Shining and
Mm.
The Stand, and these books, I mean, he just pumped them out one after the other, and each one was better than the last. And so, and I don't, I'm not saying that I would try to compare myself ever to Stephen King, because he's a master. And but the vampires in Salem's Lot, would probably most closely resemble vampires that I would write about. I'll put it that way. Even though I don't really have a plot yet beyond the whole 1840s vampire scare thing, which I find really cool. But yeah, it would be something along the lines of the vampires from Salem's Lot, I would have
Yeah.
to say.
Yeah, it was Pet Cemetery and It were the first two Stephen King books that I read, and from there I was hooked, up until recently because he does pump them out. Well, it was for a
Mhm.
while there, and I just kind of got. But yeah, his earlier stuff,
Yeah, well, I'm
Skeleton
the same way. Like once I
short
started
stories.
writing all the time, I couldn't read every Stephen King book. I just didn't have the time. But you mentioned Pet Cemetery. Oh my God, the ending of Pet Cemetery. I don't know if you remember it, but I didn't. The book was creepy, absolutely, but I didn't find it to be super scary like some of his other ones until the end. The
Mhm.
end, it literally made a chill go down my spine. Like that, the ending of that book, you could not write a better ending. I mean, it's just classic. I love it. I would reread the book just for the ending. I mean, that's how good it was. I mean, I can't recommend that book enough.
Now, something funny you said towards the beginning of the interview there is that when you write, you just puke stuff on the page. So so
Not a
I
very
take it that
artful way to put it, but
well, that's what you said. I wrote it down. So I take it therefore that you don't do like an outline or anything. You just kind of how do you get started with a novel, and how do you set it all up? And
to varying degrees, I've written some books where I knew exactly where I wanted to start, exactly where I wanted to end, and exactly how I wanted to get there. I've done that. I've also written other books where I started and I had no idea where I was even going with it. I didn't know where I was going to end or how I was going to get there, and I just, kind of let things go from my head and puked them onto the page. The only book I've ever written an outline for, interestingly enough, was Final Vector, and I did that because I thought I could save some time if I set the whole thing up and had the whole outline of the whole book written. I could just follow the outline and just it would go faster. But what ended up happening was I spent probably 3.5, 4 weeks developing this very detailed outline that by the time I got a third of the way through the book, I had veered so far from the outline, it was useless. So instead of saving myself time, I wasted time because I didn't use except for the very beginning of the outline. It was useless. I ended up tossing it. It didn't do me any good. So that was one of my earlier books. And after that kind of sort of outline fiasco, I decided outlines just really weren't for me. When I know when I know what I want to have happen, I see it in my head, and all I have to do is write down what I see. And it sounds kind of weird, but I have had cases where I've seen a whole 80,000 word novel in my head and just written it all down. Like it sounds almost like a movie in my head. Like, I don't know, maybe I'm insane, but that's that has happened. And in other cases where that's not the case, I take it step by step. I go, okay, well, this is where I left off yesterday. This is chapter 3, and this is what's happening here. So what's a good place to go from here? And then I'll write chapter 4 without really having any idea what's going to happen in chapter 5. And when I do that, what eventually ends up happening is probably a third to 35 to 40% of the way through the book. Now it's kind of gotten a momentum of its own, and now I know where I'm going. And it most of the time I kind of see a pathway. There comes a point in every book, every single book, where I have a plot point that I have trouble resolving, and I have to stop and figure it out. And it might take anywhere from a couple hours to a couple weeks to just figure out how to resolve this plot point. And usually, when that resolution happens, it's when I'm doing something menial like cutting my grass or shoveling snow or taking a shower, and then it'll just pop into my head. This is how I can solve this problem, and then I go on my merry way and finish the book. It's really kind of weird, and whenever it happens, every time it happens, I think, well, what if I can't figure this out? And yet I always do eventually.
have you ever gone off on sort of a tangent And like you said, it just keeps going and going and going. It's coming out, it's flowing. But then when you step back and you read what you wrote,
Oh yeah.
say, wait a minute, where did this just go? And you
Yeah.
just kind of scrap all that, get back to where you kind of went off on that tangent,
Mhm.
and bring it back into focus.
Yes, that's the main drawback of writing without an outline. That will happen. It has happened to me, and I've had cases where I've thrown away, I don't know, probably 4 or 5 chapters because I've written myself into a corner, or I've gone in a direction that doesn't make sense to the story, or all of a sudden my main character is not a main character anymore, and the story's not working because of that. Like, there's a million reasons why it might happen, but um, yes, it does happen. And the other thing, the other natural result of writing without an outline is you have a lot of fixing to do when you're done with a first draft. Like I said before, when I finish a first draft, I don't want anybody to see it. Sometimes I don't even want to look at it because it just doesn't, it's just not that good. It doesn't make sense. It's clunky and the dialogue sucks and the action doesn't flow. And it's like it requires, I think writing without an outline probably requires a lot more extensive rewriting than would be the case if I followed an outline. So it probably takes me longer to write a book because of that and is more aggravating, but it works for me. Like, it just,
Mm.
writing an outline just doesn't work for me. But yes, that definitely has happened multiple times.
Now we know with Final Vector, for some of the more technical stuff, when you got done with a section or a paragraph, you had that person that you researched with read it. And when you finished your manuscript, now I know you have an editor, you use editors.
Mhm.
Do you ever use beta readers before you or after you go to an editor?
I've never used beta readers, and I've never been part of a critique group. The reason being that if I could have Stephen King and James Patterson and Michael Connolly as my beta readers, I would absolutely use I would use a hell out of beta readers. I'd use beta readers all the time. But the problem with beta readers is they're readers. Fiction is so subjective that what works for you might not work for the next guy, and what doesn't work for you might work great for the next guy or the next woman. And so I I I don't know how to put this without sounding dismissive, but I don't want my work to be influenced by people that don't know what I'm trying to say with my story. You know what I'm saying?
As
If
to where
I
an editor of that genre has an idea of what you're probably trying to say.
Oh yeah, editing is different. Editor is different because, well, there's different types of editing. There's developmental editing where they will help you fill your plot holes and fix the flow and all that stuff. And then there's editing of grammar and punctuation and
Right.
all the stuff that nobody is super really good at. Like, I'm okay at it, but everybody can use an editor. Um, but in the during in the events where I've had developmental editing assistants, um, that I look at that as a totally different scenario because this is a professional and he or she, I believe most of the cases I've done developmental editing has been with a woman, a female editor, for whatever reason. So she has intuitively known where I was going, and the other thing about editing too is, and I suppose would be the same with beta readers or critique group, ultimately it's your story. Like, you can take or leave any suggestion you get from an editor. Um, no editor is ever going to force you to use his or her suggestions, but for the most part, you're kind of stupid if you don't because they know what they're doing, particularly with grammar. But yeah, I feel like if I take too much of everyone else's opinion into account, I'm diluting my story. Now it's
Right.
not, I'm not telling the story that I started out wanting to tell. So I would rather tell my story in my way. And again, while taking editing assistance, but I want it to be my story. And if people don't like it, then that's okay. I mean, at
Yeah.
least I told the story I wanted to tell. Nobody's going to like all your stuff, and some people are going to hopefully love it. Maybe.
Have you ever run into a situation with an editor where they suggested, well, you had one say you should change the ending on this. You did. It came out to be a great book. But have you ever said, you know what? No, I really, really like the way I wrote this part. So thank you, but no thank you.
Yes, I have done that, and it's not usually that it's not usually that dramatic. A lot of times it's a sentence or two where they say, well, I don't like the way you said this, or are you sure you want to do it this way? And I'm like, yeah, I really do. But that said, I would say probably 95 or more percent of the time that I get a suggested edit from an editor, I'm going to take it because, again, they know what they're doing, and I I want to write my story, but I also want it to be believable, to flow properly, to have uh, good, if not snappy dialogue, at least believable dialogue. And so all these are areas where editing assistants can come in really handy. I haven't used professional editors on all my books, but a large percentage of them I did. And I, in addition to the fact that I feel they made for better books, I learned a ton. I've learned a ton. My first editor was a young woman, or I don't know if she was young or not, but a woman named Lori Pop at Medallion Press. Um, my debut novel was Final Vector, and that was published by Medallion Press back in 2011, 12, and no, 11, 2011. And going through the editing process with Lori Pop was eye-opening because I had never worked with an editor. I had never had occasion to, and she was so good and so professional, so on top of everything that I considered it a tremendous learning experience, and I've learned a lot from all the editors I've worked with. It's really beneficial.
Do you belong to any other writers groups or anything where you've been able to take stuff from and see other people's ways of doing things and incorporate it into the way you write your books?
Nope. The way that I've learned, like I've never even taken a writing class. So the way that I learned to write fiction was by reading so much and devouring books from authors that I admired. Stephen King being one, Lawrence Block is another. This is a guy that's written more crime novels than I don't know how many he's written, but he's written a ton of novels. He was making money writing before I was born, and you know, I'm 61. Like he's been around forever, and he's a terrific writer. Uh, I've read a bunch of his stuff. Donald Westlake was another. Just writers that I greatly admire. That's how I learned to write fiction, by reading their stuff. Um, I don't know.
Have you ever run out of a plot um, before you finish the book? And if so, turn it into a novella or even a short story?
Um, Not really, although I had it happen the other way around. I wrote a short story that eventually, when I first was trying to get a novel published, I sent Pascagonkey to Shane Staley at Dark Fuse, and he got back to me after reading it, and he said, "Well, it's not really for me," he said, "but I like your writing style, and I'm wondering if you would be willing to write a novella to submit." At the time, it wasn't Dark Fuse, it was called Delirium Books, and they had a novella series. And he said, "I'd like to invite you to submit a novella for the Delirium Books novella series." And I was like, hell yeah, I'll submit a novella. What a terrific opportunity. Like, I wanted to get this novel published, but if you'll publish one of my novella, no, there were no guarantees. All he was asking me was to submit. But I was like, yeah, what a tremendous opportunity. The problem was I didn't have a novella. But I had a short story that I had written that was probably around 6,000 words or so. And it was called Darkness Falls. And it was about a writer that returns to his hometown and slowly goes insane. And so I looked at this short story and I was thinking, if I beef this story up and I add a couple characters and I add some scenarios, I think I can make this into a novella. And so that's what I did. I spent probably 3 weeks feverishly rewriting this short story, and eventually it became about a 22,000 word novella. I submitted it to Delirium Books, and they loved it, and they published it. And I have the little tiny, uh, they made little hardcover, collectible hardcovers, and I have a few of those, and I cherish them. And right after I did that one, right after they accepted that one and published it, I feverishly wrote another novella and submitted it to them, and they published that one too, and it was called Heartless. And Heartless is probably one of my favorite things I've ever written, even though like some of the other stuff, not too many people have probably read it, but they published that one too. So interestingly enough, I've never run out of plot before the end of a novel, but I have expanded a plot to write a novella.
Well,
Yeah.
so Tony would like to know, Medallion, Dark Fuse, should Silver Shamrock be worried?
Probably. everybody that publishes my novels goes out of business. Although I don't think Medallion's still, I think they're still in business, aren't they? I don't know. But yeah, I told him, I said though, I told Ken at Silver Shamrock, I was like, I put these people out of business. He goes, "No, don't worry about it."
So why did you go self-pub with some and traditional publishers or small time press with others?
Um, if you remember back around right after ebooks came out, there was a big back and forth in the writing community about, oh, it's better to self-publish. No, it's better to have a publisher, and it's better for this, like this. Writers that should have been supporting each other were like this. They were going at each other because, oh, I'm self-publishing and self-publishing is great, and that's the only way to go. And traditionally published authors were pissed off about it, going, well, you can publish crap if you're self-publishing, and which is right. And so amid this whole backdrop, I was still trying to find a publisher. I was still trying to find an agent. I still wanted to get published. And when I signed the contract with Medallion for Final Vector, I signed the contract in December of 2009, but publication wasn't going to occur until February of 2011, 14 months later. And I was like, well, okay, that's fine. I understand, it takes time to publish a book and all that. But meanwhile, I was writing all the time. And, I spent 14 years basically writing all the time. And even though I'm not the fastest writer in the world, I can write 3-4 books a year. And so there was no possible way I was going to find publishers for all of them. It just wasn't possible. So the Pascagonkey book, the first in the Pascagonkey series, that was published by Stonehouse Inc. And after that came out and I had Revenant ready to go, I was like, I might as well self-publish it and see what happens. So that's what I did. I got a cover and I published it myself. And I kind of believe there are advantages to having a publisher. There are other advantages to self-publishing. One of the main ones being that you can keep all the royalties for yourself. But what I eventually found was that with self-publishing, there are so many books available, and this is true of if you have a publisher too. I mean, there's a ton of books out there. When anybody can publish a book, everybody publishes a book. And so it's really hard to get your work noticed. So I've kind of started to go back from self-publishing towards the idea of going with publishers, only because even the small indies have resources as far as developing networks for professional reviews, that sort of thing. And while you have to share royalties with a publisher, you also have kind of a partner to go with. Like, for example, the Lupin Project, that was in the process at Dark Fuse when they went under. I got the rights back and self-published it. And then when Ken at Silver Shamrock decided to take it, it went through an editing process again. And so I had the benefit of professional editing again, for this book, and I feel it made it better. And so that's one of the advantages that I'm kind of leaning back toward, as far as the kind of tug of war between self-publishing and professional publishing with indies. I've long since concluded that um, Penguin isn't going to come knocking at my door. None of the big five or four or whatever they are now are probably ever going to come knocking at my door. So my choices are self-publishing or going with indies that I believe are doing quality work. And so I kind of am leaning back towards the publishing aspect now because, again, professional editing, the network of possible professional reviewers, and I kind of like the idea of working with people. I'm not ever going to get rich from writing. If I can find people that like my work and read it and enjoy it and love it and tell their friends about it, that's awesome.
Well, and you mentioned too yourself that you're not a marketer. You hate marketing. So I guess that's one plus side
Yeah,
to a traditional publisher, either big or small, is that they help in that aspect. If you're go-getter, you're out there, more extroverted, and you like promoting yourself, then I guess the self-publishing is a good fit for you because you want to do all that yourself.
it can be. I mean, a lot of it depends on what the author's after, you know. But in the early days of self-publishing, it seemed like, I don't want to say it was easier, but there wasn't the flood of material that there is now. And, there's a lot of crap that's being self-published that is almost unreadable. I know because I've tried to read some of it, and I don't, not everybody's a writer, although everybody wants to be a writer. And I don't mean that, I probably sound elitist, but I don't mean it that way. It's just that some people are good at some things and some people are good at others. And when you think you can write, but you really can't, you're going to flood the marketplace with stuff nobody wants to read. And the end result is there's a lot of stuff out there and there's more and more every day, and it's hard to get your work noticed. And so if Silver Shamrock has a cadre of fans that read their stuff, then that's a potential audience for my work if they publish my work. And so, it's not an easy gig. It is not an easy gig, but you really got to love it because, you're not going to get
Well,
rich doing it.
well, and I know that from our perspective, booksellers, bookstores perspective, we get a lot of self-published authors who'd like us to carry their books, and there are some that are not up to definitely our standards.
Mhm.
We've gotten a flood of self-published sort of kind of memoirs and more more things like, well, and this is for everybody, this is a workplace thing. My Dark Lord days at
Mhm.
Tracon, I did a lot of poetry. It was
Mhm. I
really
remember.
dark poetry and stuff, and I loved the work, but it helped. But I'm
Mhm.
not going to put it into a book because it was more of a personal
Yeah, no,
thing,
I get that.
you
You
know.
showed me some of it. I
So
loved it.
yeah, and so that's we're getting some of those where there are more self-help things,
Mhm.
and they're being marketed as trying to help other people based because of what they experience and how, but it's just
Right.
not ready for market because it's, but great, it was cathartic for you to be able to write this and get it out and
Yep.
heal yourself, but it's not necessarily ready
Right. Not
for the
not
general
so
public,
marketable. Yeah, I get
which
it.
it could be if maybe you had gone a traditional route,
Right.
um, and had that extra help in
Get
doing it.
editing help. Yeah.
So we're going to kind of wrap this up here in a few minutes, but I did want to say, you mentioned this way back when we were talking about Tracy Tanner, that if a movie producer ever came knocking at your door, that uh, you're right there with a script.
Oh
You
yeah.
ever think
I'm glad
about
we did it.
you ever think about writing a script for to be
I,
ready for when that happens?
I've thought of it. I've never gotten beyond the thinking about it stage because I don't really have any idea what that would entail. I think it would be fun, but I kind of suspect if I did it, I would end up, the product would end up being what you were just describing for a lot of the people that are bringing stuff that want you to carry it in your store. I kind of suspect it would it would end up being amateurish, um, because it's not anything I've ever attempted to do. And I know I can write. I know I can write fiction. Let me put it that way. I don't know if I can write a screenplay. It might be something fun to try, but I suspect it would be the kind of thing that would end up down here in the bottom drawer of my desk, never to see the light of day.
Oh, somebody does come to you and say, "Hey, look, we have a screenplay here for this. Would you like to see it more as a TV series or like a Hulu or Netflix series or big box office James Bondish sort of, one right after the other series?"
Well, since we're in the land of fiction and what ideally, like some of the best work is being done with streaming services, Netflix, like some of the stuff that is being produced for them is just terrific. My wife and I just watched season 3 of oh, I can't remember the name of it now. It stars the young lady that used to be in Castle. You remember that show? And
Oh, yeah.
she was the cop in Castle, but
Yep.
it's plays a much different role. And I cannot remember the name of the series, but it's really well done and it's well written and it's well acted. Season 3 was the best season I thought yet. And so ideally, if the fiction gods came down and said, "We'll give you one opportunity to have a Tracy Tanner series," I would probably want it produced by a streaming service because they're doing some really, I think a lot of the streaming stuff that they're producing is better quality than network TV. And that's how I look at it.
Stana Katic.
And Caddick, yes.
Katic.
She's terrific in this series, and I can't
Yeah.
remember the name of it.
The Castle series was my wife's and daughter's favorite all-time show. I love it too. It's just so different. Kind of like Bones, the show Bones. It's just different. It's whimsical, but it's serious. It's just different from all your other LA Laws and NYPD Blues and all that
Take
state.
themselves really seriously.
So if you could have, and I have in mind, just from, I haven't read any of the Tracy Tanner books, but just the way you describe the character and the plots and everything and the action stuff, I have an idea who I'd like to see as sort of a kick-ass person to play her role. If you could have anybody you want to play her role in TV, movie, whatever, in a production, who would it be?
Boy, I don't know, because I'm picturing Stana Katic right now, although she's older. Tracy Tanner is in the late 20s. She's 28, 29. So I don't know because I'm not up to date enough on the actresses that are out there. Who would you say? Like who are you picturing? Like I don't know.
I
used to give
picture
it quite
Mila
a bit of
Jovovich.
thought, but I've kind of stopped now because I know it's not going to happen, so it's a waste of time.
Well, and now that you mentioned too, now that you mentioned the age of Tracy, this actress is a little on the older side, but I think she could still do it because she's just in the best kick-ass movies. Mila Jovovich.
Yeah, she'd make a good Tracy Tanner. I wouldn't object to that. Let's make that happen.
All right.
Call her.
All right. Yep. Yeah, I thought she was great in the zombie movies there.
I know what you're talking about, and I can't think of the.
I hate it when I do that.
Yeah, me too.
Resident Evil, the Resident Evil movies. Yeah,
it's happening
those
more
were
and
great.
more as I get older.
Yeah, I know. Me too. Me too. So, have you ever thought of audiobooks for any of your books? I
have. The Lonely Mile is available on audiobook. I believe that's the only one of my books that is. I look at audiobook production as too expensive a proposition for me to do. I can, if I want to self-publish a book, I can do so and have at least a fairly decent chance of recouping my money if sales are okay. Audiobooks, I love them. Like I've listened to a ton of audiobooks, but the cost of producing one, I think, is just above and beyond what I'm capable of supporting, at least right now. I'd love to see them available, but I just don't. I don't know.
Well, unfortunately, I just had an accident at the house, so I've got to cut this short. But I just want to say thank you very much for doing this. Al's books, a few of them are available in the store. A few of them, most if not all of them, are available through bookshop.org, and of course straight through Al. Al, again, thank you very much for doing this.
You bet. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
And everybody who joined us, it was thank you very much for joining us. We got one more tomorrow night with Haverhouse Publishing, and we'll see you then.
Take care.